All right, welcome to C Files, last reading of the night. And this is the battle for Christmas. Pulitzer Prize finalist Stefan Nissenbaum, The Cultural History of America's Most Cherished Holiday. We're in chapter 3. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining the C Files. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy these readings. Chapter 3 is The Parlor and the Street. And this is the battle for Santa Claus and alcohol in New York. And it's just talking about the history of it. That's all I'm doing. It's going through the history of it in the United States. So here on page 90, and we'll begin. Sorry for my throat, folks. During the 1822 Christmas season, the very season, excuse me, I tried to get the next word out and my throat completely locked up on me. Let me try it again. During the 1822 Christmas season, the very season during which Clement Moore was writing A Visit from St. Nicholas, a New York newspaper editor, proposed that one aspect of a local holiday celebration be reformed. Oh, we got a reformation of Christmas going on here. As we have seen from the experience of John Pintard, many respectable New York men during the 1820s spent part of their New Year's Day in paying visits to the homes of their circle of acquaintances. There they received by the women of the household who were expected to serve them food and drink, alcoholic drink. For example, that some season, I'm sorry, for example, that same season, another New York newspaper published without comment a notice from an anonymous group of unmarried gentlemen, noting their expectation that the ladies they visited would serve them large quantities of cake and wine, rum jelly, and hot punch. The forming editor, a Federalist named William Leete Stone. That's He's a Federalist. I have a book up here, The Federalist, about the founding of the country. Anyway, we'll do it again. the the reforming editor, a Federalist named William Leete Stone, called for a stop to the serving of alcohol in the course of these New Year's Day visits. A cup of good coffee would be an excellent substitute, he suggested, a token of hospitality that would serve to tranquilize the excesses of the young. Stone's suggestion met with a barrage of public ridicule. This was several years before the emergence of a temperance movement in the United States. One man, he did not provide his name, but identified himself as a former sheriff of the county, wrote an especially pointed rejoinder. This sheriff embroidered a lengthy account of his usual sequence of visits to homes, where he had always counted on being greeted with gaiety and hospitality. But at every stop, he was now greeted only with a cup of coffee. Kept him up for the night shift, I guess. Hope there were plenty of restrooms around. Coffee runs right through you. When he when he declined one such offer by telling his hostess that he had breakfast already, he was told that this is not intended as breakfast. Mr. Stone of the commercial recommends coffee as a substitute for wine and or cordial. So it went through the morning. "Oh, sir," said one of his hostesses, "'tis all the rage now, wine and cordial heat the blood, while coffee warms and stimulates without producing deleterious effects." You won't be drunk on duty. So it does, ma'am, at breakfast, but at this hour I would prefer a glass of raspberry cordial and a cookie, vulgar as it may appear. Well, trying to find my spot. Even at the house of a good friend, a house where gaiety and hospitality were ever united. The sheriff encountered only a neat gilt china cup filled with coffee, presented to me by a beautiful young lady. "Surely you will not refuse anything I offer you," said the lady, with a bewitching smile and with some tenderness in it. When he continued to protest, she added, "But, sir, 'tis recommended in the newspapers by Mr. Stone." At last, the sheriff gave up and decided instead to visit some of the hotels, the landlords having thrown open their doors with their usual hospitality. At one of these, our old friend Niblos, there was, as usual, good fare and a hearty welcome. Another hoteler provided such a display of wines and delicacies as has never been surpassed in this city. At length, the sheriff entered a third hotel, and there he encountered an unexpected guest. Who should I see seated at the table and up to his elbows in good things but my coffee drinking friend Stone? Oh, this is developing. The sheriff looked around the table, and thank heaven not a cup of coffee was to be seen. Stone was so intent on eating cold round of beef and turkey and washing it down with large draughts of old Madeira that he saw nobody. And if it had not been cruel to have checked this terminal gratification of his appetite, I certainly should have been tempted to have gone up to him and said, "Stone, how are you off for coffee?" The sheriff took pains to show that he knew all about holiday rowdiness, too, and that it did not bother him very much. Indeed, he wrote with much affection that much affection, I'm sorry. Indeed, he wrote with much more affection than anger about the antics of working class men on New Year's Eve. Such behavior was nothing more than part of the standard ceremonies and jollifications of the occasion. It was hardly surprising that these New Yorkers sometimes chose to go on what they called a spree. Some of them went forth with bands of music to serenade their friends, but the most mischievous amused themselves by knocking on doors, displaying signs, knocking down the watchmen, firing crackers and pistols, and snow belling the frail fair ones of the city. About 20 of the revelers were jailed for the night. Sometimes justice is done, isn't it? About 20 of the revelers were jailed for the night, but even incarceration failed to dampen their spirits. In the jailhouse itself, they snapped their fingers, danced waltzes, whistled loud and shrilled, and sang glees and catches. Nor did the magistrate, who tried their case earlier the next morning, seem troubled by their offenses, for as the sheriff concluded, in consideration of the day, he discharged them all with suitable admonitions and without requiring any fees or fines. It was an interesting account. The sheriff presented himself as a man who reached easily across class lines and was equally at ease in the drawing room of a splendid mansion, a boisterous public house, and even a jail. Actually, the only people who seemed to bother him were reformers like Colonel Stone and fashionable women. In that sense, his little story is about gender and class. Women are the purveyors of fashion who pretend the decline of real hospitality in the form of good food and drink. The sheriff must go to a public house, run and attended by men, in order to eat and drink properly. He takes pains to let his readers know that he is not bothered by working class drinking and rowdiness. The real social threat, however, humorously it is posed, comes from emerging middle class reforms, represented by Stone's editorial appeal for coffee instead of alcohol. And it is women who read and act on this advice, who read and act on this advice, turning even the homes of old friends into cold comfort. As the decades passed and the temperance movement emerged and spread, other newspaper editors tried to rally women to the anti-drinking cause. Almost every New almost every New York's during the 1840s, for example, I'm sorry, almost every New Year's during the 1840s, for example, Horace Greeley used his paper, the New York Tribune, to persuade women to remove alcohol from their tables. Resistance to the reform of the Christmas season thus came from above as well as below. Men of a similar stripe to the sheriff actually tried to claim Santa Claus himself as an ally in the cause of old fashioned hospitality. 2 years earlier, in 1820, a New York newspaper printed a poem about Santa in which the good St. Nicholas had just come from Amsterdam to give the New Year's maids their cakes, the Penister lads their drams. The poem then proceeded to address the lads directly. Much, much to the saint you owe, for eggs and nuts and pipes and crowls, and whiskey's jovial flow. Nor was this all. On January the 4th, 1828, 5 years after Clement Clarke Moore had written A Visit from St. Nicholas, And during the very Christmas season in which his poem began to be widely printed in newspapers around the nation, at least two New York newspapers printed another poem, this one bearing the title Ode to St. Claus, written on New Year's Eve. The author of this 1828 poem signed himself Rip Van Dam, a sure indication that he was not of Dutch ancestry, and insisted in an introductory note that he had written his poem only because, so far as I know, nothing in the way of honorable commendation hath been sung in this city of honest Dutch burghers to the thrice blessed Saint Nicholas, the saint of all saints, the king of good fellows. That claim may have been a dig at Moore's poem, because the figure of St. Claus he presented, good king of good fellows, was a far cry from Moore's. To be sure, Rip Van Dam's figure is chubby and jolly, and he, too, fills every stocking with little treats, apples and nuts and sugar plums, grateful to little Orchan's gums, new suits for girls and boys, pretty books and prettier toys. But that was not all his. Excuse me, I'm struggling with my throat. My apologies. But that was not all this St. Nicholas brought. The very next verse promised other treats of a very different order. Mulled cider, cherry bounce, and spiced rum. Jolly saint, oh hither come. And the poet went on to fantasize about joining Santa in a drunken orgy. Come then with thy merry eye, and let us bouse it, booze it, till we die. Come and o'er my thirsty soul floods of smoking glasses roll. This Santa Claus was an imp who would frisk about and encourage his charges, no doubt emboldened by drink, to dance and perform merry pranks. Only one such prank is named, but it suggests what this writer had in mind. Maidens would approach their male companions to seek a kiss. This Santa Claus was not other than the Lord Misrule, master of the Christmas carnival. A little short, thick, lusty, whoreson rover, rolling about the room full half seas over. Rip Van Dam himself acknowledged that this lusty and drunken whoreson of a Santa was on the way out, a figure of the past, merely a nostalgic symbol. You're out of here, Santa. Fashions were changing, he lamented, and all the good of olden times is lost, save in old-fashioned rhymes, while cold, hard-hearted revelry usurps the place of heartfelt glee. Only a faithful few had kept to the old traditions, though good old customs have long flown, and few thy honest way will own. Still I will bow the reverent knee, and shout Santa Claus, all hail to thee. Of course, it was Clement Moore and not Rip Van Dam whose representation of Santa Claus carried the day. Sorry, I had to pause for just a moment there. Nor given the new patterns of holiday violence. Should that be surprising? Indeed, the very day that the Ode to St. Claus appeared, the same newspaper carried a shocked report about an especially violent Calathumpian New Year's Eve parade, in which more than 1,000 persons of all ages marched down many of the principal streets of the city, committing outrageous acts. The mob moved from one end of the city to the other, making the most hideous noises, committing many excuses, and for several hours of succession, disturbing neighborhoods where they thought proper to become, in some measure, stationary, to such a degree that sleep and rest for the sick or for the well were entirely destroyed. No nocturnal tumult or disturbance that we have ever witnessed was in any measure equal to this. We understand that wherever the watch offered to interfere for the purpose of preventing mischief, they were either overpowered or intimidated by numbers, and the mob had undisputed possession of the streets until a very late hour in the night. Well, the newspaper demanded that the authorities take aggressive action to prevent any recurrence of such outrages, and it asserted that alcohol was the proximate cause. Such a multitude of persons assembling together for an unlawful purpose, with maddened when maddened with the liquor and conscious to their force, will, after a very few more experiments, be guilty of the greatest atrocities. Most important of all, the account concluded the public should not dismiss these events by viewing them through the lens of sensual ritual as high jinks that had to be tolerated. It is in vain to wink at such excesses merely because they occur at a season of festivity. A license of this description will soon turn festivals of joy into regular periods of fear to the inhabitants, and will end in scenes of riot, intemperance, and bloodshed. What had taken place was not a matter of letting off steam at Christmas. It was a criminal mob. And here, the editor hinted at the presence of underlying economic issues. A mob not only stimulated by drink, but also enkindled by resentment. Left to itself, it would soon commit the most outrageous offenses without reflection and without remorse. Remember that this report appeared in the same newspaper that simultaneously printed Rip Van Dam's Ode to the Drinking Santa Claus. But by now, an alternative was beginning to emerge. The other newspaper that printed Van Dam's poem that year also began to deal with Christmas in a new way, as a family holiday. Oh, here it comes. A family holiday. In previous years, that paper had casually printed verses about Christmas revelry. The paper published two holiday items in its December 28, 1827 issue. An editorial that termed Christmas a festival a festival sacred to domestic enjoyments, in a reprint um, of a passage from Washington Irving's Bracebridge Hall, sketches that described how Christmas evoked the pure element of domestic felicity. And the following year, in 1828, the same paper carried an account of the Christmas celebration in New York, an account that stressed sobriety and associated it with Santa Claus himself. Merry Christmas was celebrated yesterday joyously and soberly in our goodly Dutch city. This account began, but it continued by acknowledging that New York was Dutch no longer. It had become a multi-ethnic city with new houses and new names. Even so, the report insisted the ancient Dutch Christmas traditions had managed to remain in place among the new immigrant groups. The olden festivals retain their hold, and the good Saint Nicholas is adopted into the calendar of all the nations that can congregate in this, his faithful city, and makes glad the hearts of merry urchins of the various tongues and kindreds that now call New York home. It is no coincidence that the previous year's Calathumpian riot had been perpetrated largely by immigrants. It is no coincidence that the editor now chose to associate the Santa Claus ritual with a sober Christmas and made their ritual serve as an instrument of cultural assimilation for the various tongues and kindreds that now call New York home. Yeah, they were talking about assimilation even back then. It is no coincidence that the same newspaper had previously recognized that heavy drinking was an integral part of the holiday season, and that in 1829 it would demand that alcohol be eliminated. It is no coincidence, in short, that Clement Clark Moore's Santa Claus beat out Rip Van Dam's. Ha 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 ha! We have a winner. Just a little bit further to go and we'll finish up the video. This is not to say that the rowdy Christmas season simply disappeared or even diminished. A domestic Santa Claus did not obliterate other modes of celebrating the holiday. Indeed, it still has not. On New Year's Eve, 1839 to 1840, one ailing visitor to the city was kept awake by revelers making frightful noises. This visitor, Eliza Fallen, or is it Elizabeth or Eliza Folan? I think that's correct. Eliza Folan reported that the lights in her sick room mhm, attracted the attention of some rioters in the street that stopped under the window and screamed, "Happy New Year!" with what seemed to me the voices of fiends. The sound was so frightful. For that matter, a domestic Santa Claus did not wholly extinguish other versions of St. Nicholas himself. Just a week before Folan's unpleasant experience, a New York theater advertised a Christmas night performance of a new pantomime got up for the occasion called Santa Claus or the Orgies of St. Nicholas. I learned some things about the 1800s that I didn't know. This is getting interesting. Oh boy, you folks in the 1800s, I tell you, you need to get under control. All right. To read the city's newspapers at mid-century is to encounter upbeat editorials about Christmas shopping and the joyous expectations of children juxtaposed with unsettling reports of holiday drunkenness and rioting. A couple of examples will tell the story. On December 26th, 1840, a party of German Americans, they were engaged in fiddling, dancing, and making night hideous with their discordant din, engaged in a serious street battle with the police, in which 25 people were arrested. I think the police won that one. But on the same day, the paper announced that the holidays are at hand, the merry days to which childhood and youth look forward throughout the year with such anticipation and delight. The holidays, as this report defined them, were domestic and child-centered. Santa Claus is about making his annual visit to our world renowned Dutch city. And the holidays were commercial. The display of all sorts of presents is striking, the paper boasted. The various shops and establishments whose special province it is to minister to the supply of Christmas wants exhibit no lack of accustomed temptation. In 1839, the New York Herald made it clear that this was the only decent choice, that all avoid taverns and grog shops for a few days at least and spend their money at home. And that way, men would be sure to make glad upon one day the domestic hearth, the virtuous wife, the innocent, smiling, merry hearted children, and the blessed mother. Christmas, the editorial concluded, is the most hallowed season of the whole year. Not everyone, not for everyone. In 1848, George Templeton Strong, I'll say it again, George Templeton Strong, was able to note casually that Christmas was essentially an indoor and domestic festival. But when he took an omnibus to go shopping that same day, he noted that the driver was drunk and the progress of the vehicle was like that of a hippopotamus. Well, 2 years later, with accounts of Santa Claus and Christmas, shopping plastered lavishly throughout the pages of the Tribune, gangs of youths were still roaming the streets at Christmas, making trouble wherever they went. By this time, the gangs even had names such as the Short Boys, Swill Boys, Rock Boys, Old Maid Boys, Holy CH-S, whatever that is, and other bands of midnight prowlers who should have been in state prison long ago. New Year's Eve, 1851 to 52, was ushered into the city by what the Tribune termed a Saturnalia of discord, by Callithumpian and Cowbellian bands, by musketry and firecrackers, by bacchanal songs and noisy revels, for which 2 hours after midnight made sleep not a thing to be dreamed of. Now, if you're not familiar with Saturnalia, that's actually an ancient Roman holiday, and it had to do with Saturn, the god Saturn of Rome. And so they were connecting, he was connecting Saturnalia with the modern celebration of Christmas and its revelry, having to do with the revelry part of it. All right. Look up Saturnalia and learn about it. That you'll get a better understanding of what he was just saying here. I'll read it one more time. New Year's Eve, 1851 to 52, was ushered into the city by Cowbellian, no, I'm sorry, ushered into the city by what the Tribune termed a Saturnalia of discord, by Callithumpian and Cowbellian bands, by musketry and firecrackers, by bacchanal songs and noisy revels, which for 2 hours after midnight made sleep not a thing to be dreamed of. One man was arrested for entering uninvited the house of Philip Herring during his absence and insulting his wife. Oh, yeah, you don't insult the man's wife. And a group of about 150 men, most of them apparently Irish, the Irish, and all of them drunk. Yeah, a drunk Irish. Invaded a fashionable Broadway restaurant and systematically destroyed the furniture. Okay. Threw food fight, and dishes around the place. And finally, before the police arrived, assaulted the owner, his wife, and their staff. All in all, upwards of 100 men were arrested that night. Man, the numbers are getting up there, aren't they? 100. For entering residences in which they never were before, and where they knew not a soul, and after eating and drinking without molestation to their hearts, content, maliciously breaking decanters, dishes, scattering the provisions about the premises, and not content with that, in many instances, breaking windows, doors, and behaving more like fiends than like men. Wow, Christmas was wild back then. At the heart of all this disorder, the Tribune reiterated, was the prevalence of alcohol during the Christmas season. In the 11th ward, an unusual number of men were arrested for drunkenness, creating a mob, exciting a riot, insulting females, and other offenses to which men of low breeding, when intoxicated, are addicted. Such behavior was abetted by certain business establishments. Local bars actually served drinks gratis on Christmas Day, in a holdover from the Old English custom demanded of innkeepers, which was itself a variant of the tradition by which the gentry held open house for their dependents. The results, Horace Greeley reported, were obnoxious. The first flash of morning discovered the liquor shops in full operation, with bowls of smoking punch and medicine for all sorts, free as water. This dangerous and wicked temptation was the means of setting a great many young men and boys in a state of crazy intoxication long before noon. As early as 10 o'clock, we saw in Broadway, between the Park and Broome Street, about a dozen parties of boys, each numbering from 4 to 10 persons, nearly every one grossly drunk, and four fellas in as many parties, entirely helpless, and being dragged along by neck and heels by their hardly less drunk companions. What had changed? Then was not that the rowdier ways of celebrating Christmas had disappeared, or even that they had diminished, but a new kind of holiday celebration, domestic and child-centered, had been fashioned and was now being claimed as the real Christmas. The rest of it, public drunkenness and threats, or acts of violence, rough music, had been redefined as crime, making night hideous. In part, this was accomplished through institutional means. In 1828, New York introduced a professional police force to replace the private watch that had failed to control the previous year's Callithumpian riot. And in part, it was accomplished through the manipulation of language itself. Henceforth, newspaper stories about Santa Claus would appear under the heading Christmas, while stories about Callithumpian activities would be relegated to the police column. In the terminology of later age, those activities would be marginalized. We'll pick up on page 99 next time. Bells, Nichols, and Burlesquers in Philadelphia. What a fascinating history. It's fun to read and fun to read to you guys. I hope you're enjoying it and learning some things along the way. It's good to know these type of histories because they really help us as we see how things are developing today. What's the big complaints about Christmas today? Well, it's too commercial, too commercial, too commercial. Um, and it's was it the reason for the season is Christ, that type of thing. And so you can see where the development is going. And frankly, I think it's going in a good direction from where it came from. And I hope it keeps going in that direction. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time here on the C Files.